going to be talking today about compassion fatigue, the cost of caring. And our objectives for the day are to define compassion fatigue, so you'll be able to know exactly what that means. Understand the impact of compassion fatigue on COVID-19 caregivers, including you guys, contact tracers and case investigators and resource coordinators. Learn about the symptoms of compassion fatigue, assess your current level of compassion fatigue or burnout, and learn strategies to prevent and or ease compassion fatigue, and make a personal plan for dealing with it. So that's quite a chunk of stuff that we want to cover in an hour. We're going to try our best to keep it moving. Let's start with just talking basically about empathy. And I view empathy as your superpower. So when I think of empathy and contact tracing, I know that the ability to empathize is really a big part of the work that you do. In fact, one of the primary reasons that you were hired for your position was likely your ability to demonstrate empathy. I'm going to bet on that. But as most of you know, if you've been doing this job for a while, there's also a cost to caring. Contact tracers, case investigators, resource coordinators, you're working in public health right now, and you may have a background in public health. You may have a background in nursing or medicine or library science. So there's a real variety of fields that come together in terms of the people that are contact tracers. Now, if you don't come from a clinical background, if you don't come from social work or a human service field, you may not be trained in understanding and preventing and managing compassion fatigue. It might not be something that was ever part of you ever thought about. So in their guidance on contact training, the American Psychological Association made a suggestion, and it is that those who are likely to experience compassion fatigue, that you create something like a semi-permeable membrane, something around your heart. I mean, the trick is to be able to let in just enough, but not so much of other people's emotion that you're actually drowned in it. So this is really important. It's important for you because you're always moving. You're not just talking to somebody and then having time to digest that necessarily. You're going on to the next person and the next call. So it puts you at an increased risk of compassion fatigue. Whether it's listening to the fears associated with COVID diagnosis itself, or people grieving the loss of family members and friends, or people not having enough sick time or financial resources to quarantine, you're going to be talking with people and you're going to be hearing the suffering of others. Although, as I said, those of you who are already doing this, I'm preaching to the choir, that's what happens. And those of you who are new to the game, it's just something to keep in mind because you can actually prevent the kinds of burnout and compassion fatigue that can occur in this kind of work. So what is compassion fatigue? Compassion fatigue is a profound experience of physical, mental, and just spiritual exhaustion. We can think of it, and in fact, we should think of it as a secondary trauma. So it's a negative side effect of caring for others in distress. And we see this, as I said before, we see this a lot in people who work in healthcare, people who deal with acute and end stage medical care, ICU folks. And it's very, very well established in the literature and pretty well understood. In the beginning, compassion fatigue used to get lumped in with burnout, but they're really not the same thing. We'll take a look at how burnout and compassion fatigue are different. So compassion fatigue is something that, well, it has a lot of similarities to burnout, but it is also very different. Burnout tends to occur when people are overworked, right? If you work in an environment that's high intensity and you have to produce a lot, you're always on, but you have not a lot of resources, you're under-resourced, that often leads to burnout. I mean, you end up just feeling spent. You may find yourself at the end of the day feeling like you just have nothing more to give. That's burnout. Compassion fatigue, on the other hand, it develops very quick. It can develop very quickly. It doesn't have to be a slow process. You can have one day where you have 2 or 3 people that you're talking to who are really suffering, and you're hearing that and you're engaging with them, you're helping them, and you're taking in their trauma. You're feeling it too. You may have things that have gone on in your life. Maybe perhaps you lost somebody to COVID, or you're caring for people who have COVID. Many, many things can come up that are triggers. But the key difference between compassion fatigue and burnout is that compassion fatigue is associated with that secondary trauma. You are feeling it, you are being triggered by it. So rather than like feeling, oh, I'm just so spent, I have nothing left to give, you may be experiencing just total emotional fatigue, that kind of fatigue we just talked about. And again, that's the cost of caring. So why is it important for you? Well, there are no published papers, as far as I could see. I mean, I searched the literature and I just couldn't find anything specific to compassion fatigue for contact tracers in the published literature base. But people are talking about it. And certainly in some of the popular literature or in the professional literature, I see that it's coming up. And it's reasonable. It's reasonable to expect and prepare for compassion fatigue for you guys, because contact tracers engage, as I said, in multiple conversations. Mostly it's over the phone. So you're taking in a whole lot of information. And the people you're reaching out to, they could be emotionally shaken by COVID-19 exposure. They may be struggling on how to handle their exposure status, who and how much to share. They may also likely be juggling other life stressors related to or unrelated to COVID. So it's not uncommon for contact tracers to hear about relational problems, psychological issues, medical and financial issues, among others. Opening yourself repeatedly to those problems and pain can trigger distress. And so it really is important to be aware of how you're responding every moment that you're doing the work that you do, the important work that you do. Okay, so let's just talk a little about what the signs are for compassion fatigue. And we can see listed on this slide, we have emotional signs, physical, cognitive, and behavioral. And in the slides that come up next, we'll just go through each one of these individually and take a look at some of the things that you might experience. So in terms of the emotional symptoms, you might feel overwhelmed. There might be days when, or even right after a call, there might be times that you feel overwhelmed and powerless, hearing about other people's suffering. It's perfectly human, it's perfectly normal. You might also feel a little anger and irritability. And again, this can come on suddenly, or it can just begin to feel like, like a little more chronic and everyday thing that you're just kind of irritable. You might manifest anger towards colleagues or family members or clients themselves. You may find yourself irritated with like minor events that normally wouldn't bother you at all, like people standing outside your door talking loud, and all of a sudden, like you just can't take that. You're getting very irritated. You might get irritated when your client doesn't follow through on things that he or she said they would follow through on. So, you have a person who said that they're going to quarantine and they don't, or they're going to get a test and they don't, and you've really gone through the effort of helping them take care of the logistics to get there and they haven't done it again and again with people, and you begin to feel irritable. You begin to lose a little of your compassion for them. Your empathy goes down, and the list goes on and on, with the inevitable outcome, of course, that you just don't feel very good about yourself as a helper or a parent or a friend or a spouse. You just start feeling down and not very competent, which is not a very good thing. You may feel what we call dissociation. This happens when people are very anxious, and you just begin to detach from the stressful situation or surroundings. You put up a physical or an emotional barrier, and you may feel emotionally numb. You may feel apathetic, like you just don't have any feelings of sympathy. It's like blah, 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 here we go again, more of the same. You may feel hypersensitive or insensitive to other stories. So overreacting to things that people are telling you, or again, just withdrawing and not reacting appropriately at all. And you may have just generally limited thing. Okay, and in terms of the physical symptoms, I'm sure you'll recognize some of these. I know I recognize some of these. You may develop somatization. So that's just a fancy word for what happens when we translate our emotional stress into physical symptoms, right? I think most of us will be aware of this. I know I am, because I'm very somatic in terms of my my unhealthy coping with stress. Examples would include things like tension headaches, frequent stress-induced migraines, gastrointestinal symptoms, nausea. You might feel nauseous, unexplained dizziness. These kind of ailments are real, but the root cause, when it's somatization, is largely emotional and stress related. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not real. So we hear, sometimes people go to the doctor, they say, oh, it's all in your head, as if all in your head is nothing. There's a connection between our minds and our bodies, our feelings and our thoughts. And so if you are the kind of person like I am, who tends to express your stress physically, it's really important to keep your eye on that stuff and to be thinking about what's going on in your world, and particularly in your work world. Now, somatization in its most intense form can be, you can become like a hypochondriac. And I don't know about you, when I was working in the cancer field, I worked for many years as a counselor on a cancer information counseling line. And like you, I would take call after call. It was the kind of thing where people called in to me and I had to be there. And it's not uncommon to become so hypervigilant about potential physical ailments that you or even someone you love develops. So you can, you might experience, like I said with cancer care, that every bump or bruise actually indicates some form of cancer. And for you guys, maybe it's every sniffle is COVID, I'm not sure. But the bottom line is you just begin to become hyper vigilant about symptoms and thinking catastrophically, like you definitely have the worst case scenario of whatever it is. And while it sounds like, wow, that sounds pretty intense, but think about it. I mean, if you're a somatic person, you probably have experienced this before. Insomnia. So you may have difficulty sleeping, or you may have nightmares. You may notice that you're dreaming about others who have COVID-19. You might dream about your clients. You might dream that it's happening to your family. Just people find their way, and COVID finds its way into your dreams, causing you discomfort and distress. So that's another symptom of compassion fatigue. And just generally being tense, agitated, and feeling on the edge, just not comfortable with yourself. not comfortable in your own body. So there are also cognitive symptoms. So one of the biggest ones is rumination. And I guess that ties in pretty well with like what happens at night when you're laying in bed and you're just thinking and thinking about clients that you saw, worried about people, wondering if people are okay, when you're really on your own time. I mean, you really need to be sleeping, but you're ruminating and it's hard to turn off those thoughts. Also thoughts of self-blame, like I should have done more. Maybe there was something else I could have said that would have, you know, convinced this person to get a test. Just generally being down on yourself and not feeling very confident in what you're doing. That reduced sense of self-efficacy and professional competence, not feeling like you're on your game, not trusting that you have good judgment to help people in the correct way, difficulty concentrating, difficulty focusing and making decisions. So you're working with somebody, perhaps you're right in the middle of an intervention, and all of a sudden you just don't know what to do. It's like you lose your way, a total loss of focus. We'll go to the next one. And then finally, the behavioral component, which is also so important. So in some cases, you will recognize the behavioral stuff even before you recognize some of the other feelings and thoughts. If you notice that you're having an increased use of alcohol or drugs, and I know this was a big thing that happened for people anyway during the pandemic, when they were in the home more, people just found themselves, you know, drinking a little more, maybe having a second glass of wine or beer with dinner, or maybe more than that, maybe, you know, substantially increasing the amount of drinking, taking over-the-counter drugs to help us sleep. Any kind of change in that substance and alcohol is something that you really want to watch for. Emotional withdrawal, so, you know, struggling to stay connected to people, even the people you love. You may turn down invitations that you would normally accept, and you might even, you know, not want to text or talk on the phone with people, even people who are close to you. So you feel yourself pulling back, like you just don't want to engage. Relationship conflicts. It's not uncommon for people with compassion fatigue to notice changes in their relationships with family and friends. For some, the first signs of compassion fatigue are just a growing impatience with loved ones and others' requests for attention and help. Home, or your partner comes home and tells you about a bad day that they're having. Normally you would be empathic about that. You know, you might say something encouraging or affirmative, but when you're beginning to be fatigued, you might actually feel resentful. Like, who are you to complain? Do you have any idea what I heard today? What I've seen today? So that's really not uncommon to have less patience for the people that love. Effectiveness at work. So you might be taking off more days, more absenteeism, attrition, just not showing up, leaving your job, avoidance of new and compromised care for existing clients. So you have these clients and they're difficult. They have a lot of, they're not difficult. Their lives are difficult. Their challenges are difficult, and you just don't feel like hearing any more of it or dealing with it. So you avoid those people. And of course, you feel like you're not very good at your job, and that contributes to not only your job dissatisfaction, but really it's a decrease in the quality of care of our patients. So it's not good for the clients. It's not good for us. Basically, those are the symptoms that I would love for you to be aware of. And now if we shift gears a little, we can move to assessing your own compassion fatigue. So we sent you compassion fatigue. It's the ProQual, compassion, satisfaction, and fatigue self-assessment. We sent you that. I hope everybody got it and brought it with you today. And I hope you took the opportunity to just score yourself. And it was a scale of 1 to you would give yourself a rating on various items on the scale. So now what I'd like to do, just so you get a good sense of where you are with compassion fatigue, is to go through that together with you. So if you can pull out your test that you completed, and the page that accompanied that, where you get to write down your score, we will walk through scoring that together. I'm seeing, oh, Erin, you were sending a message. Okay, so this scale is made up of, well, 3 different domains. So there is compassion satisfaction, which is what we all hope for and work towards. That's where we feel really passionate and good about the work we're doing. We feel vitalized. We're like zealots. We're ready to go. And usually we're in a state of high compassion satisfaction when we first start our jobs, and we're just feeling so good about what we're doing and the impact we're going to have. So that's the first domain, is satisfaction, compassion satisfaction. And then there's a secondary trauma scale and a burnout scale. So we're going to go through each one of these and we'll score them together, and then we'll look at what they mean. So on your compassion satisfaction, for your compassion satisfaction score, you want to look at these numbers on your sheet. So what was your score for the numbers 3, 6, 12, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 27, and 30? If you can take a moment right now and add those up, you can write it there in the total.
I just popped it in the chat again if you did not get a chance, because I know we had a few last minute registrants, so you can download it onto your computer and take a look in detail later. But this will give you a good sense of what's on it and how your scores, how you can interpret your scores.
Okay, so has everybody, I'm going to assume that was enough time for everybody to total their scores there on that satisfaction, compassion satisfaction. So you can look over to the side there. And so it says, if the sum of your compassion satisfaction question is 22 or less, then your score equals 43 or less, and that's low. So that's low compassion. If it's between 23 and 41, and your score equals around 50, then you have average. And if it's 42 or more, 57 or higher, then it's high. And we can go to the next slide and see how we interpret that. Can you go to the next slide, Erin?
Yes, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. So here's your score up there. And if you look down below, you see that compassion satisfaction, it's the pleasure you derive. We've already talked about. The average score is 50. So you can compare yourself to other people. About 25% of people who take this test score higher than 57, and about 25% of people score lower than 43. So if you're in the higher range, you're doing well, you're deriving a good deal of professional satisfaction from your position. If your scores are lower, then you may be having some problems with your job. You may actually be experiencing some compassion fatigue or burnout. It's really important for you to know that we're going to talk about tips for remaining resilient and keeping up our sense of compassion and empathy for our clients. Can we look at the next next dimension on the scale. The next one is burnout. And again, burnout is different, but it overlaps with compassion fatigue and secondary trauma. But it is a little different. So you can see the items here, and there are stars next to the scoring. So on those numbers, you want to reverse. So instead of going low to high, you go high to low. Does that make sense? Does anyone have a question about that? So let's just go ahead and add up those scores and see where you end up. There's a nice diagram on the side there that shows you how to flip them. I hate when they put those in there, but it's important. Okay. If you're not completely finished, at least you know, and we can send you this scoring key after the presentation, so you can look at it in more depth. We didn't want to trick you by holding this from you. We just wanted to have the opportunity to do it together. Okay, so there you'll put your score, and as we've talked about, that if your score is below 43, your feelings about your ability to be effective at work, you feel pretty good. But if your scores are a little higher, 57, you might want to think about maybe a different area, a line of work, or maybe not. Maybe you just need to make a little plan to decrease your burnout. Talk with your supervisors or talk with your colleagues. I mean, there are many things you can do. In the end, you may decide to change your career, but hopefully that won't be the outcome for most people. And let's look at the last one. So the last one is really the compassion fatigue component. It's secondary traumatic stress. And so go ahead, just as we've done, and write in your scores on that and get your total. Okay. So you can see where you are. And the scoring is exactly the same. So you put your score up there and take a look and see if you are really at experiencing secondary trauma. If you're either having primary exposure or secondary exposure. And it does a nice job on this sheet of again, including what you might be feeling. Afraid, difficulty sleeping. These are like PTSD symptoms, secondary trauma symptoms, having images of the upsetting event pop into your mind, avoiding things that remind you of the event. These are all common, normal responses to trauma. Now, if you are really high, if you think you are having those kinds of primary or secondary traumatic responses, that it's clinically relevant, it really is important to talk to someone professional and seek some therapeutic help. Most of us will not reach that, but we have lived experience. And when I read somewhere that working with clients in contact tracing is sort of like going back into a wound. You're just reminding them of things that they are struggling with, And you can also trigger your own wounds. So it's really, really important to pay attention to that and to understand why. I mean, you might think, why is this happening to me? I'm not going through it. Secondary trauma is very real. Okay, so what can we do though? What can we do if we are in a place where we want to restore our passion and compassion? Like if you're doing great, if your compassion satisfaction scores are high, and your other scores are low, and you're basically doing good, then just keep doing what you're doing and stay aware. But if you're struggling, if your scores are not where you want them to be, then let's talk about some simple things that we can do to restore passion and compassion. Because again, it can come on quickly, but it also can go away quickly if it is responded to appropriately. So let's talk about a few things that we can do. And I'm not going to go into a super lot of depth here, because this is a short webinar to just kind of whet our appetite for this particular topic. But as we get to know you better and really get a sense of what your needs are, we certainly can put together a workshop that's way more interactive and intensive than the webinar. For now, let's just talk about some simple things that we can do. We see on this slide from, and this is from Good Therapy, a quote: taking care of myself doesn't mean me first, it means me too. So it means including ourselves in the context of care, not just putting all of our energy out there for others, but making sure we're included in there too. Let's look at some common tips that we can follow. Here, we're focusing on the little things, right? And I say the little things because not just because we don't have a lot of time today, but there's endless ways to replenish ourselves physically, emotionally, and spiritually. There are tons of books. If you search self-care on the internet, you will find so many books, so many articles, so many people, how you can do it. And usually the suggestions that people make, they're very good, right? We read about the importance of taking time for yourself and hot baths as often as you can, long walks and in the mountains, exercising, putting together an exercising plan, changing your diet. I mean, awesome things, right? But we already don't have enough time in the day. So we wanted to give you something a little more practical that you can connect to. And some of them are as easy as asking for help. That's a hard one for helpers. I can say that with experience. Spending time alone in general, that doesn't have to be hours. That doesn't have to be setting up a little retreat up to Idaho Springs, hot springs. It can actually be just a time alone, 10 minutes a couple of times a day, or 5 minutes a couple of times a day. If you can get more time, that's great. And setting boundaries. We have in the Patient Navigator program, we actually cover boundaries and self-care in one of our modules. I highly recommend it if people have not taken that particular module before in the training. It's for patient navigators, but it's perfectly certainly applicable to you if you're not a patient navigator and you're doing this work. It's important to be able to know what you can and you can't do in the context of work and home. You cannot be everything to everyone. And it doesn't have to be huge. It just means that you have to be clear about what you can and can't do. Try not to overpromise and overextend yourself. And how about saying no? Is that okay for you? I mean, just to say no from time to time. If it really feels like something won't fit, don't squish it, because what's going to go are other things that are valuable to you. What's going to go all the time are the things for you, for your own self-care. So say no to some things when your plate is getting full. Forgive yourself. We're human. We can't do everything right all the time. And being able to forgive yourself is very freeing and very affirmative and very compassionate, self-compassion. Sometimes you can just take a step back, just pull back a little bit. Even, just if you feel like, you're irritable, you're angry, you want to respond in the moment, or you're just feeling overwhelmed, rather than respond at all, take a few minutes, go in your office for a little while, take a little walk, just don't respond right away. And in our intro slide there, it said that self-care is not putting yourself first, but it's including yourself. So I always talk about that, including yourself in the context of care. But in order to do that, sometimes you have to say, I am important too. And it is important that I do this for me rather than doing something for you. So these are little things that we can do. We can work it into every day. It just takes awareness. And I would encourage you to think about ways, and we'll actually talk in the end about having you formally think about that, maybe making a plan for some things you can do differently if you're not doing these things for yourself now. And there's life balance. So I like to think that life and work balance is a myth, that really it's all life balance, and that balance starts with you. Balance starts with me. It's an internal state first. So let's talk about some simple things that we can do to regain a sense of life balance. You can get a coach, and you can you can take courses. You can do elaborate ways of prioritizing, planning, working through the various domains of a healthy life. And I encourage you to do all of that. But if you're like me, tomorrow you'll be back to the grind of work. And some of those things take longer. So again, let's just look at some practical things that we can do for life balance. So I have here use a planner. And by use a planner, I'm not talking about your little calendar in Outlook and all those little calendars we keep. I'm talking about the old-fashioned planner, and where you can actually have a big square and you can decide what's important. And it might not just be work, and it might not just be family. You can pencil in time for me. So when you're doing your whole full week planning with all of your meetings, you can be sure, look for those downtimes and get a me time, get those little mini vacations worked in for yourself. You can pencil in time for friends and family, because otherwise it might not happen. You'll get so busy and you never get together with the people you had thought you might. So definitely pencil that in. I had already talked about taking short breaks. That's so important. Those short breaks are cumulative. It's just like they say, you don't have to exercise for 30 minutes. You can do 10 minutes 3 times a day. Well, it's the same for exercising your self-care. Short breaks are important. We know exercise is important, but light physical activity does so much to lift our spirits and give us a new perspective. So to the extent that you can just get out walking, even if it's leisurely walking, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever brings you joy, get outside, see the trees, work it in for as little or as much time as you can. It's very important to try and stay focused. So much of our time gets sucked up at work with distractions. And of course, some distractions we have no control over at all, right? We have things thrown on our lap that we weren't expecting. We're multitasking. But some of the distractions are our own. And I think if you start paying attention to that, you see that a lot of the distractions are our own, from social media and phone and just all the things that we do to distract ourselves in the day. So shut the personal line off. Don't just, if you can, stay off social media during the work hours. You could do that later if you're so inclined. And I like the thought of taking a break from your head and your heart. So in your head, you're usually planning, and that's kind of contributes to worry. And in your heart, you're usually thinking about the things that have happened for people. If you take a break from that, maybe move to your lungs, maybe live in your lungs a little while and just take in the moment of breathing. I have found breathing to be really powerful in terms of stress management. So simple, but so valuable, so effective. So those are just some ideas I have that I will throw out there for you. And then meaning and purpose. Oh my goodness, this is so important. We can go to the next slide. Oh boy, values, right? Values are they're the essence of our lives. What we value, what we believe drives the decisions we make and the actions we take. I know when we teach motivational interviewing, we really spend a lot of time on learning to talk with our clients about their values and getting in touch with the ways their values are or are not supporting them, the choices that they're making. So I want to encourage you to really think about your values and whether you feel you're living in harmony with them or not, because that's like the sort of the soul of meaning work, is to know who you are, what you believe, and what you value. Fulfilling personal goals. We tend to put our own goals on hold to take care of everyone else. If you can line your goals with your values and just take regular steps to meet those goals, that increases your sense of achievement and autonomy and competence in the world. Follow your gifts and talents. We spend so much time looking at the areas where we fall short, and not so much time on what our gifts are, what we're bringing, what's unique to us, what we bring to the world. So definitely focusing more on that. Making connections. I'm talking about a couple of connections with people who are curious and passionate and really interested and care about you, so that you can exchange ideas and have really dynamic conversations every now and again. That's not about the grind of life. And then the final two there, search for the silver lining and keep a journal, we're going to cover in the next slide. I made a little added note there to, if you can, just quit watching TV and watch what social media you engage in. There is so much anger and negativity that fills our heads and just like sucks up all the room for the things that are valuable and important in our lives. So take a break from that stuff. And I'm still trying to convince myself to do that because I get pulled in all the time. So back to the positive connections and silver linings. One of the ways that I found, and actually I have to be honest, we used this in a breast cancer survivor study. We created a whole intervention around this towards personal growth. So, on the other side of trauma, the negative consequences of events, there's also trauma-related growth. And so I'd like to encourage all of you to really think about whatever positive is coming out of your work as a contact tracer, whatever you're doing on your job. And one way that you can do that is to think about, really think deeply about and journal if you can, or if you're an artist, create an image, write a song, do something that allows you to process what you've learned and how have you grown from the experience of the work that you're doing. If you think about this, you folks are on the forefront of something really historical here. I'm not exaggerating. 100 years from now, people are going to be very curious about what we did, how we handled this pandemic. Maybe your grandchildren, your great nieces and nephews will be wondering about, they heard you had done this kind of work. Think now about what you're learning. What are you learning about yourself in doing this work? What have you learned from and about others? In what ways are you different because you've done this? And how can you apply what you've learned here to other areas of your life? What do you most want to remember about the work you've done? What do you want to write down? You could even write down something for the future generations, what you did. Can you imagine how powerful it would be for somebody to receive that, to know that you were there? This is historical moment. You are doing really powerful work. You may be getting messages from all sorts of people that, you're part of some conspiracy. So be it. We have to find a way to put that semi-permeable little membrane around our heart and put that stuff in its place. What matters most is, what does this mean to you in the moment? And I cannot really stress enough how important that kind of dialogue with yourself is in terms of renewing your passion and keeping you human and compassionately resilient. Okay, that was a lot. So since we've been so pithy in terms of our ideas of what you can do to cope or prevent compassion fatigue, then we would naturally have a pithy plan, right? We're not going to give you some big old assignment that is going to take you weeks to complete, although those things are good too. So what we'd like for you to do is, after you leave today, just think about, and we can see it on the next slide, 3 things, 3 easy things, whether it's from the self-care or the finding balance or finding meaning, 3 things that you can do this week. When you get off the presentation, if you don't have to go right back to work, if you don't have a client scheduled, I would encourage you to take the time to do this now, and if not, do it soon, because we all know these presentations, we forget what was covered. And then for now, for this moment, if you would write down on the next slide, 1 thing that you'll do, 1 thing you'll do right away, something that really stood out to you. You don't have to share it with us, but it's for you. And if you could commit yourself to that and do that 1 thing, that would be a major step in taking care of yourself. Okay, how are we on time? Oh my goodness. So we do have a few minutes, almost 5 minutes for questions, if people would like to ask questions. There you are.
All right, you can either feel free to come off mute and ask a question, or if you'd like to pop it in the chat. I will make the recording available, absolutely. And I also put a link to the slides and the self-assessment, because I know a few people who are joined by browser, probably those attachments aren't coming through for you. So that's just a Google Drive folder that will link you right up to that information. And then I will put a link to the evaluation in the chat as well, because that way we really appreciate your feedback. It helps us offer more free trainings like this. And it's a chance, if you loved one of the topics and you want to dive deeper in the future, like more workshopy, where you could discuss over small groups, please throw those ideas at us, because we'd love to explore those options. Yeah.
So
yeah, do we have any questions for Kathy?
I see one. Elaborate more on my gifts and talents. Well, I think you'll have to elaborate more on your gifts and talents, Teresa. But I would encourage you to think about what those are. Reflect upon the things that you do, whether it's in your work with your clients. What do you do that you feel most connects you with people and is most helpful and is most satisfying to you? So for me, people skills are my strength. And I say that with humility, because I'm not always right on with people, but that's my strength. And I know that if I can put aside a desire to like know everything, like to have every bit of information, every resource that someone's going to need, and relax into who I really am and be with people in the moment, I know that something, the potential is there for a connection that leads to something powerful and meaningful for me and the person. So that's a strength. I should do more of that, and I should do less of worrying about memorizing things for presentations and things like that. But you have to find yours. You have to think about it. Oh, wow. That's awesome. So somebody is commenting that they recognize that food is their strength. Wow. And that they made something that really was wonderful last night. See, that's it. That's awesome.
Yeah, I know, Kathy, we talk a lot about in the patient navigator trainings, and a few if you took the resource coordinator modules, about recognizing the strengths in your clients. So that is also a very good skill, but then turning it on yourself and realizing you too have unique strengths to offer to your position, your organization, and the clients you serve.
That's such a good point. It's sometimes it's easier for us to recognize strengths in our friends and our clients than it is in ourselves. We can be so self-critical. Know what you bring to the world, wear it.
People are throwing out, oh, having this as a series. Yeah, thank you for that idea.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it since I've been working on this presentation. I've been thinking about ideas for like interactive stuff that we could do together. And I would love to see that happen.
Thank you so much, Kathy.
Oh, thank you. It was my pleasure.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody.
Mhm.
Bye.